I was born in New York City, and my mother was a secretary before she had her children, but then she stopped working and was just a housewife. My father was a bookkeeper. He worked for the same company for many years, but he didn't make too big a salary. We lived in a relatively small apartment and had an older brother and a younger sister. And there were 2 bedrooms in the apartment, so sometimes my brother and I slept in the living room in a pull-out couch. I went to, and in fact all my siblings went to Catholic schools. At that time, they were relatively inexpensive. They are more expensive today. Of course, you can go to public school for free and all, but probably the Catholic schools were better on the whole. And then after high school, I studied to become a priest, but I left after college, and then I started working in the social work field, and I got a traineeship that enabled me to go to graduate school in social work for free. I started out working with families who were poor, and I visited them to see how they were doing. But then later I took a job with New York State, and that's when I got my traineeship, where I was working with young people who came from troubled families and who got into trouble themselves. I worked in that area first in New York City, and then when my family was young, I moved upstate to Albany, where the state capital, where I figured there would be other jobs. And the main reason I moved was you could live less expensively there, and I'd be making the same salary as I made in New York City. I worked about until I was 54, and I took retirement at that point because I was able to get pretty much my full pension from the state, but also I learned my wife had dementia, and her condition was such that it would be very hard for me to go into work every day and leave her at home. I felt that the smartest thing was to stay at home with her, and I started to hire people to come in a little bit. And actually what I did, I continued to be a social worker after I left the state, and I had been working in the adoption field in the state, and I continued that with adoption agencies after I left. And the benefit of that financially was I was already getting the New York State pension. I couldn't get Social Security until at least age 62, I think it was, but actually most people got it at 65. But the longer you put off getting it up to age 70, the more you get when you do start collecting it. Anyway, I was able to supplement my income with this part-time income from doing adoption work. And it was also, when I worked for the state, it was more administrative, where I was really working on developing policy and procedures and things like that, and running programs, but not dealing directly with adoptive families and all. When I left, I started dealing with adoptive families, and that was more rewarding anyway, because I could meet the people who were going to adopt. I could see when the child came into their home. And adoptions were not only of babies, sometimes people adopted older children. And the process to adopt in the United States is before someone can, they have to have a home study prepared, which means you go into their home and you ask them a lot of questions about their life and their ability to be parents. Some people already had children, others didn't. And but anyway, you assess their ability, and then a court had to approve that study before they were able to adopt a child. It feels good to be able to see what's actually going on and so on. And in addition to adoption of American children, I also worked on adoptions from various countries, including Russia. That was interesting too. In a lot of cases, the Russian children were a little older, some, usually somewhere around 5 or 6, or sometime even a little older than that. But I also had adoptions from Guatemala, from Ethiopia, China, Korea. Financially, the other thing that was good about working then, that way I was able to start what they call IRAs, or individual retirement accounts, which you're not eligible. If you receive a pension in a job, you can't start an IRA, but if your job doesn't have a pension, like when I worked part-time, then later it didn't, I was able to take that money and put into these IRAs and use that for future funds I might use. And the advantage of the IRA also was that in some cases, it depends on the type of IRA, once you invest in it, you don't pay any taxes on the money when it comes out. Everyone who works, practically everyone who works in the United States can get Social Security payments, as I explained, basically when they're about 65. And even with a husband and wife, even if the wife did not work, once the husband starts getting his pension, she can get half again of what he gets. So if he gets $3,000 a month, which is kind of on a high end, but still about what I get, the wife gets an additional $1,500. If she worked, she could possibly also get $3,000. So, that's basically how it works. Social Security also has an aspect too, where children who are disabled can receive payments because of their disability to help them, and also when they become adults, because they can't get a high-paying job or sometimes not even work at all, they can continue to get these payments to help them. I grew up in a family with my father invested, even though he didn't make a lot of money. He did invest in the stock market, and he kind of taught me how to do it. And so by the time I was in my early 20s, I was investing money that I had available in stocks and what we call mutual funds, which are bundles of stocks. Over the years, that has been paid off much better, increased in value much better than bank accounts. And also, I learned about the stock market and the investing, and learned more by reading financial magazines, like 2 in the United States that I've read a lot over the years. Well, actually 3. One is called Forbes, Fortune magazine, and the other it's called Kiplinger's. Yeah, these magazines tell you about different stocks and mutual funds, and you learn about them and you decide to invest in them. So that's another, supplement. Having money in stocks and mutual funds is another supplement to my retirement. Key in terms of finances and so on is I learned from both my parents how to be what we call thrifty, how to manage my money well. And some children don't learn that from their families. Many people in this country live what they call paycheck to paycheck. And so if you don't have a habit of trying to put something aside all the time, when a crisis arises, you might not have the money to pay for what you need. It would pretty much be, on each paycheck, certain amount would be set aside. It's very hard to say what the percentage was, and it varied depending on, like America, we have to pay for our kids' college education, whereas in other countries it's very low cost or even free. Some colleges will help the people coming from families that have less money, but it means that in many cases people going to college take out college loans and have a big debt instead. Now, in the case of my son and daughter, I also invested money that for gifts and so on as they were growing up. So by the time they went to college, almost all of their tuition was paid through those monies. When they graduated from college, they didn't have any loans to repay. And also, I didn't have any loans to repay for that, because it was already taken care of. And again, that's something that it doesn't happen with many families. They don't think ahead and do those kind of things. And again, it's basically being smart about your money and so on. It's not how much you make, it's how you use what you make. There are decisions to make. For example, many people will buy a new car every few years. I never did that. I might have bought a new car, but I ran it into the ground before I sold it or junked it at that point. I think you get your best value out of the vehicle that way, but some people want a new flashy car. And then there are other things, the extras in life that you can spend money on, but if you spend on a lot of extras, you may not have that much to save at the end of the day, So, and then as I say, I think a lot of people don't get it and don't realize that. In America, and I think this is true in other countries too, it depends on where you live a lot, how much you're going to spend on a regular basis for various things. Now, groceries pretty much are the same wherever you live, although in cities I'd say they're probably a little more expensive and so on. But rents or the price of a house varies tremendously. So if you live in a rural section in many of the states, you can buy a very nice house for $200,000 to $300,000. If you lived in Los Angeles, if you had $200,000 or $300,000 to buy a house, you're going to get basically a shack. All of these people are getting the same amount of Social Security, for example. So part of it is that. Another part, of course, is did you work for a company that paid a pension? A certain number of jobs in the United States are unionized. And usually when companies have unions, they get better benefits because the union forces management to pay a decent salary. So people that, like, for example, worked in our auto industry in the past, not so much today because now they don't pay it as well, but got very, very good pensions. Now, if you work for a company and you're making a very good salary, you're almost guaranteed to have some kind of pension plan. But as I said before, if you work for a company like McDonald's, forget it. In a McDonald's store anyway, maybe if you're executive, you'll get a decent pension. So a lot of things like this it all depends. Since I've been retired, I've traveled a lot and, seen different parts of the world, and I think that's pretty fantastic and all. I can afford to live in a place like this that I live in, which is a little more expensive than other places, but has other amenities, as they say, and so on. So, that's part of it. And the other part is about retirement, of course, is, every day is the weekend for me. You're not stuck, going to work. And if I go shopping, I tend to do it during the week when other people are working. because the stores are less crowded. And so, you know, there are a lot of things like that that you don't even think about. But it's also nice to have a skill and a background where you can also do even volunteer work or work part-time later, so that you stay occupied and you still feel that you have some value to society, you know, rather than just sitting home and moping and watching TV. I believe very much in volunteer work and doing things for others and helping people. I'm a religious person, so I try to go to Mass every day, and it's right next door, so it's very convenient. I just would want to wish everyone, you know, who celebrates Christmas to have a very Merry Christmas, and everyone to have a Happy New Year.